Good afternoon. We begin. Today is the second study day, and so we're going to be going through more of the text and covering some of the central parts of the metaphysics in Plato and Aristotle, and also, given that our remaining time is short, I'll be touching on related issues in Augustine and Thomas Aquinas. And so we'll be looking today at Plato's theory of forms in a little bit of detail, though without touching on the texts themselves, really just on the metaphysical theory, and looking as well at Plato's, or rather Aristotle's, theory of forms and his distinction between form and matter. So really how Plato's theory of forms differs substantially from Aristotle's theory of form and matter. And we'll, at the end of that, hopefully we'll have a clearer picture of, as well as the distinctions, the quite often overlooked similarities and commonalities between Plato and Aristotle, and the extent to which they agree on a lot of the presuppositions, particularly that Plato has, Aristotle agrees with, and thinks that he's onto something. So the forms are postulated by Plato to explain what we now call, or in part at least, what we now call the problem of universals, and that's the really a set of related problems about the reality of categorization. So the fact that we say that these sets of billiard balls share the same shape, that some of them are of the same colour and others have a distinct colour. We say that that Socrates and Plato are the same kind of beings. They're both human beings. In 20th century language, we tend to say, and indeed it's carried on to the 21st century, but it's really often we say that things share a property, or something like this. This is definitely not the language that we find in Plato and Aristotle, but it's the idea that, as we saw with Duns Scotus, that we can pick an odd one out of a lineup, implies that there are, as well as degrees of distinction, there are degrees of unity. There's something that makes it true that Socrates and Plato are of the same kind. And that's what Plato wanted to explain. One of the things that he thought forms explained. But the question is, when we ask the question, why did Plato postulate forms, or why did he think we needed forms as objects of knowledge? It's effectively, why are we forced into postulating the existence of these entities which we can't see? Why can't we simply appeal to the things in the world around us? And so that's another way of saying, why did Plato think that the objects in the world around us are inadequate as objects of knowledge? Why did he need forms? And it's been said, you find a very nice account of this in Mark Cohen's lecture notes, and they're very brief, and they lack a little bit of detail, but they're detailed enough to get a very good picture. Both his notes on Plato's theory of forms and Aristotle on form and matter and Aristotle's categories. He says it this way, that Plato's theory is really the metaphysics and the epistemology, that's the theory of knowledge, are very, very closely linked. In fact, they're mirrored in each other. And he said that it's a metaphysical theory to accommodate epistemological needs. And we will see this in this diagram of the divided line. This is the analogy that Plato had of what we now call the two-world theory in Plato. So, in Plato's theory of forms. So he thought there were two separate worlds. This world, the world of moving physical objects, the everyday things and temporal things that come into being and pass away, things that change, and then things indeed that are sensible, things that we can sense. And then there's the other world, the world of forms, kind of as they call it, a Platonic heaven, a world of changeless, permanent, apparently uncaused essences, pure beings. And this is where we get the divided line. So on Plato's view, for various reasons, the objects in the world around us are inadequate as objects of knowledge. Their existence is somehow, metaphysically flimsy. They come into being and pass away. Things in this world change. They display opposite features, and as well as sort of going out of existence. And Plato thought that because knowledge is of what is true, and then the object of knowledge must be something permanent. It can't change. If I know something is true, then it can't be the case that that thing is false, in a very precise way. If I know that there's a cat in the back garden, then it can't be true that there's no cat in the back garden. That doesn't mean that it might not have been true. It's not a necessary truth that there's a cat in the garden, but I can't know something that's false. In sort of popular American thinking, people say, I know that aliens exist. What they really mean is that they believe that aliens exist. You can't know something unless it's true. And there are other conditions as well that are required for something to count as knowledge. But so knowledge is of what is true. You can't know something false. And this sort of opinion can be can be either true or false. Knowledge has to be true. So Plato thought that the object of knowledge must be something fixed. That he sort of agreed with this Heraclitean kind of picture that the world is in a state of flux, this material world, and so it's just too changeable to have the sort of permanence necessary of an object of knowledge. So he came up with this two-world theory, that the objects of knowledge are actually forms. So the world is divided, so that in this analogy it's a divided line. So you have at the top here, it's not important if you sort of can't see this well, because it'll all be in the text. But the line is divided in the middle, and you have the two worlds. The physical world is down here at the bottom. That's the metaphysical part. The upper part of the line is the world of forms, the non-physical world, and the unchanging world, importantly. Corresponding on the epistemological side, at the top of the line, rather I'll do it in the same order. At the bottom, corresponding to the physical world, you have the world of opinion, because this world is changeable and sort of flimsy, as I said. So at best, we can have opinion about the world, the world of changing, kind of transitory physical objects. So that is the world of opinion. The world of knowledge corresponds to the forms. So when we have knowledge, it's knowledge of the forms that we have. Anything pertaining directly to the physical world, at best we have opinion. There's a further distinctions here. which aren't particularly important, but I'll mention them anyway. On the upper part of the line, you've got a distinction between forms, and below the forms, mathematical objects. And forms are objects of the understanding, and mathematical objects, that's sort of geometrical objects, numbers and the like, are objects of thought. There's some dispute as to what, just how important this distinction is. Why are mathematical objects secondary to the forms in some sense? It's perhaps because they involve doing things out on paper to know that they're true, perhaps, or something like this. But being second best to the forms is hardly means they're in the bin in some sense. And on the lower end of the objects of opinion, corresponding to the physical world or the world of physical things, is belief. So we can have at most belief about physical objects. And then there are things that are even less real than physical objects: images, reflections and shadows, and they're objects of imagination. Again, this is a sort of technical term, and this distinction isn't the really important one. The important one is between the unchanging forms and the changing physical world, and knowledge and opinion. When it comes to, as I mentioned briefly last time about the theory of forms, objects of knowledge, according to Plato, are meant to be permanent and fixed, and what is responsible for something having some quality, such as beauty, can't be responsible for the opposite of beauty. So, in the example of the sunset, if the person who wants to limit their explanations to the physical world and to sensations answers the question, what makes the sunset beautiful? They might answer, the colours make it beautiful. And then we can say, but if I painted your living room in those colours, it would not be a beautiful living room. Those colours would be responsible for the living room being ugly. And therefore we've got a problem, that the same thing is responsible for beauty and the opposite of beauty. So that can't be what makes something beautiful. Likewise, in case of justice, if we give an attempted definition of justice, saying that returning what is borrowed is just. If I borrow a pen from someone and then return it, this is an act of justice. If I borrowed a knife from my friend who in the meantime went insane and he wanted it back, it would be unjust for me to return the knife. So that's an instance where the same thing has two opposite outcomes. So it's in the case of justice, it means that is not what justice is. Likewise, in the case of something being equal, we can have two things that are equal in some respect. These pens are equal in shape, but unequal in colour, so they're displaying opposites. And even if you found something that was completely kind of qualitatively indistinguishable, they'd have different origins. They can't both be made in the same place at the same time, just because they'll get in the way. And they're, unequal to something else. And again, these types of things, Plato didn't distinguish qualities of things from relations, so sort of have to bear with some of these examples. So Plato thought that because the lovers of sights and sounds appeal only to the things that are sensible to things that are available to sensation, they're simply not capable of explaining what it is for something to be beautiful, for someone to be just, for something to be equal to something, to be man, to have any quality at all. They can't explain. The other thing is that all the things that we have in this world appear to be imperfectly, whatever quality they are. So, if we take, this is an example from Noam Chomsky about Platonism, we take this object and we ask, what is this object? Hopefully the answer will be straightforwardly, it's a circle. But of course, it's not a circle. It's irregular. It's an irregular figure. But we're much more likely to say this is a badly drawn circle than a perfectly drawn irregular figure. So where do we get this idea of circularity? We could even get the idea of making it more perfect, rounding off these edges and fixing it and making it worse. And we have ideas of imperfection and perfection, of circularity. It turns out that we've never experienced a true circle in perception. Circularity, if you go right down to the fine grain, even the roundest things in the universe, compounded stars or something like that, neutron stars, the most spherical objects in the universe, are not completely spherical. And yet, we'll say that they're not completely spherical, rather than saying that they're perfectly whatever irregular figure they are. So we have these ideas of circularity. We have an idea of equality. And again, we've never experienced through the senses equality. Equality is not an object of sensation. And it turns out nor is beauty. Even for anything else, it'll display some whatever quality it has imperfectly. Even something like a dog, on the Platonic view, this dog might be perfectly a dog, but it always changes, and it will go out of existence one day. So it's not adequate as an object of knowledge. So, where do these concepts of qualities come from, and of kind of the perfect and imperfect beauty or degrees? If we don't get them from sensation, if the lover of sights and sounds is wrong, then Plato says we need to appeal to the lovers of forms. This is his view that the safest attitude is to say that forms are responsible for things displaying the features they have. So on Plato's view, any feature that something has, we'll say, this is a Socrates, and Socrates is a man, and that involves Socrates having a relationship to a form, the form of man. We'll say Socrates is also wise, so he has a relationship to another form, the form of wisdom. And Socrates is pale, we'll say today. That's a relationship to another form. Every quality that Socrates has, it's because of relationship to a form. What makes Socrates and Plato alike in kind is that they both participate in the form of humanity. So that's the relationship they have to the forms, is Plato calls participation. So any quality that something has, it has purely in virtue of participating in a form. Plato can then appeal to forms to explain change. When Socrates is healthy, he participates in the form of health. When he ceases to be healthy, he loses that participation in the forms. He no longer participates in the forms. He might become pale. Now he has a new relationship to the form of whiteness. Any quality that Plato or that Socrates has, or that any object in the physical world has, it has in virtue of participating in the forms. So, what is this participation? Plato explains it, at least in the middle dialogues, that he seems to change his mind about forms throughout. In the middle dialogues, he described participation in terms of copying. So that means that the form of beauty, or when something participates in the form of beauty, it's copying the form of beauty. It's a sort of a poor copy of the form of beauty. It turns out as well that in terms of it's a type of paradigm. So even the equal, when two things are equal, it's because they participate in equality, or as in Plato says in one place, he says the equals themselves. So the just itself is the form of justice. Man itself is the form of man, of humanity. Blue itself is blueness, the form of blueness. And the phrase "the equals themselves" does seem to give weight to the idea that he's thinking of some kind of paradigms, that the form of beauty is simply beauty itself. The form of beauty is sort of self-exemplifying, it's beautiful. The form of justice, the just itself is itself just. The form of good is itself good. The form of man is itself man. As Anthony Kenny says, the form of dog is the whole dog, and nothing but the dog. And indeed, completely eternal. So in part this is the circle, is participating in the perfect circle, and yet we think of it as an imperfectly drawn circle. So that still doesn't explain how we get the idea of circularity. So we have the different properties of forms. That the form of any form perfectly displays that quality. That it's the exemplary of this. It's the paradigm, and that participation involves copying or mimicking the form. How then do we know forms? Where did we get the idea of perfect circularity? Where do we get the idea of beauty if we can't have got it from the senses? So if we go back to the divided line, the corresponding to the forms is the understanding. Is knowledge. So forms are objects of the intellect, not objects of sensation. Yet, it's in contemplating objects of sensation that we come to know the forms. It's in trying to find out about things in the physical world that we come to have knowledge, but knowledge of the forms. And that's because Plato says, well, we can't have got it through sensation, and that seems, reasonable enough position. Where did we get it? According to Plato, it's from recollection. So it's from a pre-birth or pre-conception existence, when the soul existed before being embodied, where we had direct perception of the forms. We knew the forms, and through the trauma of birth, according to Plato, we forget. But by contemplation, we can come again to know the forms by recollecting them. In the dialogue Meno, Socrates, the character in Plato's dialogue, Socrates is explaining, or rather questioning, a slave boy about various things in geometry, and it looks as though the boy is coming up with the answers himself. And it's, of course, he's going through the reasoning. Socrates is asking the questions, and the boy reasons out different questions in geometry. Socrates took this to mean that, again, Socrates as the character for Plato, took this to be evidence that the boy was recollecting these truths from a prenatal existence. So, one thing I didn't mention here, because it's actually only mentioned in the Republic, when you have forms up here, physical down here, right at the top is the form of the good. It's only really mentioned in Republic. I don't think Plato really revisits it elsewhere. The form of the good is responsible, it seems to be responsible for the existence of all of the other forms. And the form of the good, in the other analogy, corresponds to the sun. the form of the good is what makes the forms intelligible to us. And it's sort of what makes us seek out knowledge. So the form of the good is responsible for the intelligibility of the world of forms to us. Right. So it's worth thinking about just this relationship. So the world of physical objects has each of the features it has in virtue of relationship to forms, this participation. In the dialogue, how is it? This is a late dialogue called Timaeus, Timaeus. Timaeus is Plato's account of the creation of the world. It has two strange accounts. One is the legend is the first account in the world of the legend of Atlantis, and it has the Eleatic stranger then giving an account of the world as being created in sort of a void or empty space by a demiurge, sort of, or rather formed together. This formless world was pieced together as little triangles in empty space. But in Timaeus, you find the nice phrase that time is the moving image of eternity. So time is the moving image of eternity, and indeed, because the objects around us in the world are sort of imperfect images of the forms, of lots of different forms, we can think of physical objects as moving images of the forms, as changing images, copies of the forms. And that leads us to one of the problems that we find solved in, at least an account given for this problem in Aristotle. And the problem is, we can give a perfectly good picture. Again, let's say here's Plato. Plato has decides to take up the banjo or something. So if there's a form of musicality, he acquires this form. If he decided to run, if there's a form of running, you can say anything that pertains to Plato is because of his participating in the form, and we can give an account of change in this way. What we apparently can't give an account of is something coming into existence, that type of change, or indeed something going out of existence in some way. We can say that if something were annihilated, we can say that it's just all relationships to the forms stop. And that's because if you consider an object of itself, just think of any physical object. You think, what is it in isolation from participation in the forms? Just on its own, what is it? It turns out every feature it has because of participating in different forms. Of itself, considered without any relationship to the forms, it's nothing at all. So what is it that comes into existence? How is it possible for something to come into existence? That is, for something to start acquiring forms, to start acquiring participation in forms. Is it the case that nothingness starts participating in the forms? This is a problem for Plato. Some of the Neoplatonists, I think Proclus and some of these chaps, sort of bit the bullet and said, yes, nothingness starts participating in forms, and we have a new thing. Again, Timaeus is something like this. There's the demiurge pieces things together in empty space, so empty space is sort of the basis. But that is a problem for Plato. Considered of themselves, physical objects are nothing at all. They're nothing except in participation with the forms. And this two-world theory, the two worlds have to be related somehow. They have to be related, otherwise we can't have, any knowledge we have of this world turns out to be knowledge of the forms. There has to be this relation of some sort of participation. But it looks as though this world is not real of itself at all. This is the only real world. And And this is a little worrying, perhaps. It wasn't worrying, wasn't too worrying to the Platonists, of course, but it's puzzling for certain. So, thinking about recollection, that we're recollecting the forms, it's easy to dismiss this as just crazy, because you'd need a lot of evidence to start thinking that what's happening in cases of knowledge is that we're starting to remember from a prenatal existence. But Plato's certainly onto something in that we can't have got these ideas from sensation. Equality is not an object of sensation. Circularity is not an object of sensation. Nor is justice isn't an object of sight or sound or something like this. And even Augustine, who is a Neoplatonist, Augustine agreed with this. Augustine, of course, being a Christian, couldn't appeal to reincarnation or a preconception existence of souls. At least most Christians at that time didn't believe in reincarnation. So he adopted something that he got again from Neoplatonism, that given that we can't give accounts of knowledge of the forms through sensation, how do we get them? Well, according to Augustine, it's through divine illumination. He found the same imperfections in the physical world as Plato. Forms didn't have this independent existence on Augustine's view. In fact, they were ideas in the mind of God. And again, idea was in the older books on Plato, they use the word idea other than forms. It's problematic because we get the idea, indeed, we get the notion of ideas as mental entities. Forms are not mental entities, so it's best not to use the term idea, even though that was the original meaning. It's in the last sort of 500 years, idea definitely means some sort of image in my head or a mental entity. So, illumination, somehow, at each point where we start to have a grasp an idea of circularity, according to Augustine, God intervenes with divine illumination. When we're somehow incapable of getting these ideas from the senses and incapable of getting them ourselves, according to Augustine, this is an intervention that we have. God intervenes and effectively imparts us with this knowledge. So that again, this is a sort of replacement for recollection, and we can see that even then Augustine is onto something, that we can't have got these ideas from the senses. We must get them from somewhere. We'll see Aristotle has his own account, which is abstraction. But so there is it's a sort of slightly off topic, but there's a popular in the social sciences, I suppose, and popular in some popular medium and media indeed, that rather than us having deep knowledge of the world, that somehow the mind structures the world, that we mould the world with our minds. There's very good reasons for thinking that this is not the case. One is that if we accept that evolution is true, then it turns out that human beings are very good at getting the world right, if you like. We're very good at finding, distinctions within the world that are really there. We can distinguish from tens of thousands of years ago, we can distinguish the poison berries from the non-poison berries. In modern humanity, when our senses fail us, we can construct massive telescopes and radio telescopes and everything to find out the very fine grain of the structured world. There is this kind of overwhelming impetus for people to think that everything in the world is simply structured by society, which is a little bit absurd. But even if we go back to the example from Duns Scotus, or a version of it, of the odd one out, I'll give you the first thing, where we have these, the three trees and the bus. So it is the case that this is the odd one out. You know, it is the case that black is the opposite of white. These are features of the sort of metaphysical world. And as Scotus said, each of these is numerically distinct. This one is more distinct than the others, but not numerically. It's still, all of them are one. This is distinct in another way. And for degrees of distinction, there are degrees of unity. So these are unified on Plato's view. They're unified because they all participate in the same form. Basically this is the same question that was being looked at in the Middle Ages, and that the world impinges upon us. We get this knowledge of the structure of the world, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the end. That knowledge is or science at least, is science of forms and not of universals, of forms and not of individuals. So, right. So we'll go on to look at Aristotle on form and matter. So according to Plato, as we saw, objects of knowledge must be unchanging objects. And all the things in the physical world are in a state of flux. So he agreed, that much he agreed with Heraclitus and Cratylus. Aristotle agreed with this, that the world around us changes all the time, that everything in the sort of the physical world on Earth changes. But where he differed from Plato is he came up with a theory that would allow him to say that changing things in this world have unchanging essences. That is, forms in things. So on Aristotle's view, the forms are not in a Platonic heaven, the forms are in the things, they're in the structure of things. Effectively, they're somehow they're structural parts of things. So if we take Plato's, one of the problems in Plato's view is this strange relation of participation or copying in the middle dialogues between physical objects and forms. On Aristotle's view, there's no need for a separate world of forms. There's no need for this strange relation of participation, this kind of mysterious participation. If we take a changing physical animal like a zebra, from the moment it's born to the aging and the time it dies, it changes throughout its entire life. But it has the same form. It is still a stripy, black and white, horse-like creature. It has unchanging features despite changing. And these unchanging features are forms. Again, not Platonic forms, not in a separate world, but as metaphysical constituents of the physical objects. So the forms that things have persist through time, on Plato's view, or on Aristotle's view. So this is what in the categories. So you have two sort of, well, really three, counting the physics. But you've got a distinction between Aristotle's view in the categories, which he talks about two different types of essences or two types of forms: the substantial form and accidental forms. And then you have the account of matter and form in the metaphysics, and a little bit before that in the physics. So in the case of the categories, he made this distinction between two types of having a property or having a form, and that is that you have a substantial form, and that's what a thing is, and the accidental forms, which is different features that things have. I'll come back to that in a little second. So the substantial form of something is an essence. The form of the substantial form of Socrates is humanity. That's what Socrates is. As long as Socrates is Socrates, as long as this being continues to exist, it will be human. As long as the zebra exists, it has zebra nature. That's its substantial form. And that, again, it doesn't just involve form in the sense of shape or anything like this, but its functions, its dispositions. You have all of its capabilities and abilities and things like that. On Aristotle's view, the form is essentially related to something's function. So the form of a knife is something that's capable of cutting. If you have a knife-shaped object made out of butter, it's not a knife. And when mentioned in the text is the four causes, again, that's they usually translated, that really there are four explanations, that the fundamental explanations of the physical world that Aristotle mentioned in the Physics. Only one of them is a cause in our modern English, and that's the efficient cause. So, the person who made this marker is the efficient cause of the marker. They brought all the bits together, made a new thing. The other causes are really types of explanations. So you have the material cause is the matter, what is something made of. The formal cause is the form, the formal, as we said, not cause but explanation. The formal cause is knife. It's the form of knife. The efficient, so less in the thing of a knife, you have the material cause, steel and wood. That's the material. The form is the form of knife. This kind of disposition, the abilities it has to cut. That's the form of knife. This sort of structure. The efficient cause is who made it, the cause of its being made, and then the final cause, it just means its purpose. And the purpose is to cut. So in the case of physical objects, artifacts, I should say, kind of artificially constructed objects, it's pretty obvious that they have a purpose because we make them for a purpose. The pens have a purpose because we want something to write, so we make pens. On Aristotle's view, animals have a purpose as well, which is to be the best type of animal, to be the best efficient tiger. Tigers have the final cause of a tiger is to be this type of hunting, sleeping, wild animal. The ultimate purpose of human beings is again to think, to survive, to eat food, and to procreate. All the things that are sort of built into human nature. This is their purpose. We don't tend to think of things having a purpose now, because as Bertrand Russell said, it was probably one of Aristotle's great mistakes to bring the idea of a purpose into biology. That it seems to get things wrong when we bring purpose into biology. I might come back to that, but so that's in the four causes. So two of these causes are form and matter. So in explaining change, this is where we get Plato's notion of forms. Is you have Plato sitting or Plato standing is really, it means different relationships to forms. The problem is that Plato coming into existence and Plato going out of existence seems to be of the same type, and that's it's more problematic. You don't say that going from being existent to being non-existent, that you just stop participating in the form of man. That's a different type of change to going from running to sitting to being short to tall, from being unwise to becoming wise. This is a different type of change. And on Aristotle's view in the categories, he has an account of these different types of change. So you have, in the categories, you have two different kinds of things, if you like, loosely. Two different types of forms. And indeed different types of predication. So you have substances, and they're really what we call things. I know now in English the term substance means material, you know, ebony we can call a substance, or brass. That's not the original meaning, because the original meaning is a philosophical meaning. It's from Latin, and it's from describing Aristotle. And substance means substantia, stands under, standing under. So that's the thing that has every other type of being, accidental beings, if you like, properties, are of properties of things. So the things in this case are horses, dogs, pens, books, you know, stones. These are things, and they're called substances. They're the kind of fundamental type of beings in Aristotle. And then you have accidents, not things happening by mistake or anything like that, but accidents meaning properties that that might change. So being blue or brown, having a particular size, dimensions. The quantity means spatial dimensions. Quality is things like colour. Relation, so you know, Socrates standing beside the fridge or sitting in the fridge. This is relation, and so on for the rest of the 9 accidental categories. The accidental categories are features of substances, of things. And so, you know, sitting or running or standing, having my hand clenched or not clenched, these are all features of the fundamental thing, the individual either artifact or physical object or organism. And indeed, on Aristotle's view, the form that something has, the substantial form, in the case of being human, the form of humanity, this internal structure, he calls that the soul, as well, which is, I mean, it really a scientific sense. There's no real religious connotation to this view on Aristotle's view. The soul is simply a set of dispositions, powers, and abilities, you know, and this kind of internal structure that something has. In the same way as a knife has a very simple structure, its structure is to cut. Human beings have a very complex structure. They have ability to move around, to think, to get nutrition, to have perceptions and thoughts and the like. And all of these are a part of what make up the form of humanity, which is human soul. On Aristotle's view, plants have a very simple soul. They have a nutritive soul. Any living thing has the form is called a soul, anima. Animals have an animative soul. They can, as well as nutrition, they have sensation and they can move about. And then in addition to this, the Homo sapiens, the human beings, have a nutritive soul, an animative soul, all in together, and an intellective soul, so they can engage in abstract thought as well as sensation and movement. And all of these are, broadly speaking, a kind of the sort of things that even the hardened scientist would believe in. They're a set of dispositions, according to Aristotle, and that is the form of the kind of individual organism. So that's the account in the categories. You have substances and then accidents, things and properties or features of things. And then we go on to the account of matter and form. And this is a way of giving an account of how things come into being and go out of being. So of course Parmenides said things can come into existence because you have this being sort of on-off. Non-being can't cause being. Being can't stop being. How do we give an account of this? Well, can things come into existence? According to Aristotle, things come into existence in the physical world by matter and form combining. So you have these, like human beings, are a composite between matter and form. So matter, form, composites. So how does this happen? So what happens is you have matter is this stuff. It's potentiality. We'll mention prime matter in a while, but let's just take a house being built. You have a new entity comes into existence, someone takes all of this clay and makes them into bricks, puts the bricks into a particular form, and now you have a house. Now you have a matter form composite. So the matter pre-existed in some other form, some other existence. That was the matter. And where did the form come from? The form came from the craftsman, the builder who made the house. So he contributed the form. He put a form on the house, and now you have a matter form entity that will keep going until someone destroys the house. The form goes out of existence, and the matter continues in some other way. The matter continues. In the case, likewise, if you have the violin maker takes the wood, he puts form on the wood. Now you have a violin. So the matter pre-existed, the form pre-existed as well, and that will go on. That matter form composite will go on existing until it's destroyed. According to Aristotle, anything that can come into being will inevitably go out of existence as well. So anything that's a composite of form and matter will cease to exist at some time. And then when it comes to natural objects, to organisms, you have generation and corruption. So generation is effectively, so you get, in the case of human beings, you have the Aristotle's biology is really rather sort of misogynistic in that he thought that the father contributed the matter in conception, and the mother contributed, or rather the father contributed form. I'll get that right. The father contributed the form. The mother contributes only matter, the kind of passive thing, the potentiality. And so you have pre-existing matter, pre-existing form, and then you get the very beginning, a new being, a matter form composite that will inevitably, at some point, will die, and the form just simply goes out of existence. Aristotle didn't believe, it seems, in certainly not an individual survival of death. The soul, he thought, in animals or in humans, simply died. So you have the form is contributed by the father, matter by the mother. Then you have this matter form composite, that is the human being, that keeps on going until the human dies, and the matter continues in some other form. Will continue on. So you end up with a peculiar thing it's really related in a little way to Plato, that Plato thought the forms were eternal. It turns out Aristotle thought this too. Aristotle thought that matter was eternal. Matter was never created. He thought the world had always existed. There's always been matter in it. Matter's always had some form or other, in this shape or that shape. Matter's always existed and combines with forms to make, material objects, which then go out of existence. So the matter's always existed, but the form's always existed as well. So on Aristotle's view, it's simple. I know it's of course technically false because there haven't always been human beings. But on his view, Socrates' form came from Socrates' father. His form came from Socrates' father, and so on and so on and so on. You've always had human beings from beginningless. There's the world without beginning. There've always been humans. There've always been any animals there are. It's almost certainly the case. He would have thought that it's simply the way the world is, that there always will be humans. He probably didn't envisage something like extinction. So, despite the fact his theory is very different from Plato's, he also thought that matter and form were both eternal entities. He didn't have any notion of creation as such. So, again, I should mention in the categories, just to flip back in time a little bit, the two types of being, substantial form and accidental form, they correspond to two types of predication, of saying something of something. And that's that in substances, you have Socrates is a man. That's saying that is something is said of Socrates, said of him, that he's a man. That's categorization. That he's a type of entity, a kind of thing. And then present in is the accidental predication. So, Socrates is pale, is saying that paleness is present in Socrates. Socrates is wise, is saying paleness is present in Socrates. It's classifying accidentals, whereas being said of is giving a classification of the type of entity that something is, that it's that type of thing. So, incidentally, about Aristotle thinking that the father contributed the form and mother only contributed the matter to this. This wasn't a universal position in the ancient world, nor in India, in fact. Galen, the great philosopher and medic, doctor in ancient Greece, he thought there were two separate principles, male and female principle, that came together to produce a child. It seems pretty obvious that somebody must have noticed that babies looked like their mothers as well as looking like their fathers. So Socrates, or rather Aristotle, probably here found a beautiful theory and kind of crammed this notion in. Unfortunately, Thomas Aquinas adopted this view as well, this biology, but it wasn't at all a universal thing. Aristotle had a fundamental distinction in his metaphysics between potentiality and actuality. Sometimes by the Thomists call it potency and act, which is a little awkward because that's not how either of these words work in English normally, but we'll say potentiality and actuality. In this case, the actuality is the form. That's what makes something the thing that it is, and the potentiality is the matter. So you take a bit of wood, and the wood is in potentia to being several things. I could make a table, I could make a chair, I could make a new fiddle. So that's the potential, and the actuality is the form that makes you have this combination between matter and form. On Aristotle's view, this combination also between potentiality and actuality. When you reach the metaphysics, so going away from making violins and houses out of kind of pre-existing stuff, he does mention the type of stuff that humans are made of. It's flesh and bone, he says. But it turns out that in this type of what they call substantial change, and substantial change is generation and corruption, really. It's when you have a new substance, a new thing emerging. So this is an accidental change is when I stand or sit, when I clench my fist or open my hand, becoming wise, becoming ignorant, any of these things that can happen to an individual. Coming into existence is the kind of total type of change. It's the big change, or going out of existence, even more noticeable, ceasing to exist. This is called substantial change, and this is when matter and form come together, or when matter and form separate. Simply when the form dissipates, effectively. And what is the continuity? So again, to go back to Parmenides, how is it that something can come into existence? Well, it's because something else existed that is now in a new kind of form. And what is the thing that survives? Before the human came into existence and after the human came into existence, what's the continuity? Well, it's not a matter of this type or that. It's pure potentiality. This is in the metaphysics now, not in physics. Pure potentiality is prime matter, as it's called, and it's often said that that prime matter is an abstraction. That it's simply an abstraction. It can't really be just an abstraction on Aristotle's view because it's a fundamental principle. It's something real. It explains what it is. That it explains that something continues to exist after I die. Something existed, some material existed before I was born, that has continued to exist throughout my life. This is prime matter. So you're not going to find prime matter lying around the world at all. Matter exists always with some form or other. But nevertheless, when this matter in the human being, say, or in an animal, undergoes substantial change, it basically gets corrupted, the matter and form separate, the form disappears on Aristotle's view, the matter continues on in some other form. So you have some form here, form of humanity here, another form here, all the form that goes into being human might originally be apples and pears and rice and stuff, have different types of forms, but there is something that continues to exist, and it can't be a pure abstraction, because it's a principle. And so it is an unusual view, given that we don't find prime matter lying around the world. But on Aristotle's view, prime matter must exist. Otherwise, there couldn't be anything that explains substantial change. Either generation or corruption. Generation is when things naturally come into being, conception, and naturally go out of being with corruption. The corruption of the organism. So what you have is you've explained why coming into being isn't, like Parmenides said, it isn't an on-off phenomenon. Plato can give it a sort of an account by saying it's an on-off relationship between forms. But again, you don't have any good account of things coming into existence or going out of existence. Aristotle, by postulating prime matter and form, has explained how things can come into being and go out of being naturally. So, artifacts such as tables and violins, Aristotle did think that they were real things, but they're sort of substances in a flimsier way. They're not, they're not as clear cut, and you can see the kind of identity conditions that you have with things like famously wheelbarrows, where you change the wheel half a dozen times and change the body a couple of times. Then it does seem to function as the same object, but you've got problems. But he still allowed that they're real things. He wasn't like some of the modern people who insist that books and tables don't exist, and yet keep publishing books and putting them on tables. So everything that comes into being or goes out of existence, on Aristotle's view, is a combination between matter and form. That's simply what it is for something to come into being, is for matter and form to come together. For something to go out of existence is for matter and form to separate. That's, on Aristotle's view, that's a complete explanation. He also thought there were other entities, and this is kind of, I'm not sure if it's mentioned in the text, I think it might be, but he called them intelligences, and they're kind of an element of Greek theology, really, and Greek belief. And they're pure souls, like pure minds. And of course, they're not combinations of matter and form. They're not like the human soul, which is the formal element in a material form matter composite. These are eternal, and they're simply they're just pure forms, and they're called intelligences, and he called them subsistent forms. They simply exist completely separately from matter. Because they're not combinations of matter and form, they can't come into existence. So in Aristotle's view, they're eternal. They've always existed. They'll always exist. They can't be taken out of existence. They can't be created, because the only things that can be started in existence are matter, form, composites. And so the question of what these entities were was of interest to some of the early kind of Christian Platonist philosophers, and Philoponus, who was a Neoplatonic Christian of a form of Christianity that's extinct now, but his teacher was a pagan, Ammonius, and Philoponus asked, what are these intelligences? Or in fact, they called them demons as well, daimon. And what are these daimon? And Ammonius said, well, you call them angels. And indeed, Thomas Aquinas took that they might be, they seem to have the similar qualities, these, as they call them, demons. They're meant to be sort of benevolent spirits, in Greek thinking. And Aquinas took them that they were talking about angels. They certainly, they borrowed this mechanism to describe angels, indeed. And in actually the Greek word for happiness is eudaimonia, which is sort of favoured by a demon. The eudaimonia ethics is in one of Aristotle's books. So eudaimonia, and sort of bad fortune or kind of unhappiness is called kakadaimonia, which is kind of unfavoured by a demon. But it's it's probably simply just the etymology of it rather than that's what they believed. So when it came to, if we sort of do a quick shift to Thomas Aquinas, Aquinas didn't believe that the world had always existed. And this is just talking about Aquinas' view of this whole picture of Aristotle and how Aquinas, this will be sort of relevant to the next lecture as well and kind of to the exams. So because time is short, I'll do it here. Aquinas didn't believe that the world has always existed. And yet he also believed that that the world came into existence. And that meant matter coming into existence, for one thing, and form coming into existence. He also believed in entities that were like the intelligences, that were pure subsistent forms. He believed in angels. And he believed that they came into existence. Even though they can't have naturally come into existence, because naturally coming into existence means being generated. Form and matter coming together. So he kind of expanded the Aristotelian worldview to include two different types of basically a different type of coming into existence and going out of existence. Not just generation and corruption, but creation and annihilation. And creation is where something is spontaneously brought into existence, not by natural means, by supernatural means. And that is when either intelligences or matter or form are brought into existence. So Aristotle has no mechanism for matter coming into existence or form coming into existence, or for subsistent forms like the angel or intelligence coming into existence. So you have a non-natural, supernatural account on Aquinas. So in addition to generation and corruption, you have creation and annihilation. And that's how, for instance, if an angel or an intelligence couldn't naturally die, couldn't go out of existence, because there's no mechanism. It's a form. The only way something can naturally go out of existence, stop existing, is if it's a composite of form and matter. Then inevitably we just wait and eventually it'll die. Even with kind of physical artifacts, the notion is eventually the matter and form will cease to hold together. They'll separate and the object will cease existing. So you can say that angels, on Aquinas' view, are naturally eternal, simply meaning that naturally they can't go out of existence. But according to Aquinas, they nevertheless could be annihilated, and they can be brought into existence by God. Aquinas also then he borrowed from from Avicenna, from the Persian philosopher, a distinction. In a sense, his is quite different. But he thought that in order to explain how the angels, or these intelligences, as Aristotle called them, how angels can be sort of subsistent and yet come into existence, he thought, well, they're actually composites as well. But not composites of form and matter, they're composites of essence and existence. And that's that anything that's created has a combination of essence, which is its form, its substantial form, and existence, which is an active existence. And as we can see in the text, Aquinas has said that the reason that we can know what a rabbit is without knowing if there are any rabbits in existence is that there is a distinction between essence and existence, between the kind of thing that something is and whether there is one of it. So everything, material beings, angelic beings, everything according to Aquinas is a combination of essence and existence, except in God, essence and existence aren't distinct. There's no distinction between effectively there's no complexity in God, and that means that God's essence includes existence. It's not in any way separate. So this is how Aquinas sort of expanded this whole worldview of Aristotle to accommodate sort of Christian requirements, and in a kind of a very systematic way. Bertrand Russell, incidentally, is well known that Russell thought that Aquinas didn't have a lot of the spirit of a real philosopher in him, because he was just trying to prove things he already believed. It was pointed out that Bertrand Russell spent about 200 pages trying to prove that 1 + 1 = 2, which is something he undoubtedly already believed. So that doesn't really count as a major criticism. But what isn't, in the same chapter, Russell says that Aquinas is almost unequalled as an expert in Aristotle's philosophy. So he did admire him greatly as well, and there's no doubt that Aquinas was an extraordinary authority on Aristotle's own writings. And even when he was professor of theology, Aquinas was still writing commentaries on Aristotle's philosophy. It wasn't at all really that he even thought that philosophy was always had to have a further end in furthering kind of some theological mission. He really knew his Aristotle very well, and again, this is why when he did expand on Aristotle's worldview, using a lot of Neoplatonic writers as well, and commentators, and a few Arabic commentators like Averroes and Avicenna, he developed this kind of systematic worldview using the structures of Aristotle. Incidentally, one of the things that Aquinas thought about the human soul, which might be worth mentioning as well, and that's that when you get matter and form come together, on Aristotle's view, inevitably this starts the clock where eventually this being will go out of existence completely. The form will disappear and the matter will continue in some other form. On Aquinas' view, of course, human beings survive death. Despite the fact the natural way for humans to exist is as embodied as physical beings, material beings, nevertheless the soul can survive death. And that means, on his view, the soul is a subsistent form, in the similar way to angels, except that it comes into existence in this material body. But, as we've seen, that anything that's eternal, anything that isn't a composite of form and matter itself, will go out of existence. Naturally. It will naturally come to an end. On Aquinas' view, the human soul doesn't naturally come to an end. It survives death. It can be annihilated, of course. This means that the human soul is a subsistent form. Behaves a bit like, after death, behaves a bit like an angel that can exist without matter. Well, that means that it must be created. The human soul isn't part of natural generation on Aquinas' view. It must be something that's created directly. And so he effectively took Aristotle's view. And Aristotle's view is that in the case of human beings, after conception you have a very, very simple soul, the kind of nutritive soul. It's very much like a plant, uncomplex. And then once the sort of fetus develops and structure, then you end up with an animative soul, and eventually, naturally, according to Aristotle, after so many months, an animative soul. The highly complex human being emerges, and all of the soul becomes more complex. On Aquinas' view, he took the same view, and that's that effectively after the nutritive soul, the animative soul, on his view, the intellective soul doesn't naturally emerge, it's created at that point, on Aquinas' view. And then that is the soul that somehow takes over the other functions of sensation, animation, and nutrition and the rest. But that soul is not a naturally generated thing. So it's not, like I said with Aristotle, that the soul is a natural set of dispositions that any scientist would believe in. On Aquinas' view, the intellective soul is directly created by God, and now you have this kind of a separated substantial form, despite the fact it is, throughout its life, united to a physical body, but it's a subsistent form, similar to that of an angel. So, right, I must get through that. There's only a few other things to mention. So one of the things that we find in the later Middle Ages, and indeed it's there in Aristotle as well, is that substantial forms are also called essences. They're also called natures in the Middle Ages. You find natura. Natures, or sometimes quiddity, which is you'll find it in the text, not important. The important thing is to think of forms, substantial forms, as essences. They're what makes Socrates the thing Socrates is Socrates' is humanity. This humanity. You can't say, I met Socrates and he's looking very well. And you think, well, of course that's Socrates. And you wouldn't say, I've met Socrates, but he's no longer human. He died. That is to cease being Socrates on Aristotle's view. So the essences that things have are these substantial forms, the kind of interior structures that things have. According to Plato, we saw that the objects of knowledge here are forms, and indeed the objects of scientific knowledge in Aristotle. Science, according to Aristotle, is not of individuals, but of essences, of, to say, universals, which is the things that recur in several entities. Human nature, biologists don't study this horse, in a sense. There's no science of this horse. There's a science of studying horse nature. You can study this horse to study horse nature, but you're studying the natures of things. Again, where Aristotle and Plato seem to agree, the objects of opinion are things in the physical world. Objects of knowledge are the forms. On Aristotle's view, the object of science is forms, substantial forms of things, accidental forms. These internal, permanent structures that things have, or the kind of fixed structures. The essences of things, rather than the individuals. Aristotle thought that the objects of sensation, the objects of the senses, of perception, are individual things, individual entities. This or that thing, this thing. These are the objects of perception. The objects of the intellect are universals, he said. This is, again, the concepts of forms. These essences in things. That's the objects of understanding. Or objects of scientific knowledge. So science is of substantial forms, of these universals, it's called in talking about sciences. When we analyse, things like laws of nature, it isn't just the case that this nail floats or sinks in this bit of water. It's that iron nature has such a relationship to water nature that iron will sink in water. We don't study this or that electron, but we study electron nature. So theoretical knowledge is knowledge of essences or forms, and these unchanging natures, not of individual things. And so the biologists study repeatable or sort of multiply, what do you call it, sort of exemplifiable. This is technical, but things that are exemplified in different places. So you get circularity in different places. You get horse nature in different horses, and this is what's studied. So it looks as though Aristotle was kind of correct that we study the essences, kind of fixed essences of this transitory and changing physical world. And where Plato and Aristotle, and indeed Aquinas, agree that we can't really have knowledge of individuals as such. What we have knowledge of is essences. So we can have acquaintance, we can have perception with individuals, but our knowledge is knowledge of essences, of the kind of the deep metaphysics. So we know that there are individuals, we perceive individuals, but our knowledge is of forms, and as they say, of universals, which is forms that are multiply spread across the physical world. Forms being shared among distinct things. In the Middle Ages, particularly, in Aristotle's view, the forms are related to function again. So it's not just the shape that something has, but its purpose and its function. So you can have, if you take take one of these old flutes or something. It's made out of wood, and it'll function as a flute because it's for playing music. You could make something that looks like this out of butter. It wouldn't work. It wouldn't be a flute. You could make it out of glass. You can make it out of metal. Someone in America made a flute out of very fine concrete, and it functions perfectly because the form it has is related to its function. It's not just the shape, but its internal structure, and that's very much how they think of things in the Middle Ages, of form as well as just dispositions, as somehow an internal structure that things have that continues while it exists. And so in Aristotle's view, Aristotle thought that a hand that's been cut off is a hand homonymously, he says, in name only, because a hand involves having functions. It involves being part of an organism, and so for something to be the thing that it is, it has to have this kind of function which is based upon the internal sort of metaphysical structure. So, in relationship to how, given that Aristotle thought that we have knowledge of forms that are internal structures, Plato had an account of his own forms that we recollected. Augustine thought that rather than recollection, that divine illumination gave us knowledge of these forms. How do we get it in Aristotle, given that we can't have perception of forms, we only have perception of individuals? Well, according to Aristotle, you have... just turn this around. But according to Aristotle, you have abstraction. So we come to know... the essences of things by abstrahere is the Latin for drawing out. We draw out the essence from the images of perception. So we can get several sort of triangles that are all different shapes and poorly drawn and the rest, and we think about this and abstract. We contemplate it and abstract what is common. And then we can come out with features of triangles. We can say that every triangle has, adds up to, internal angles adds up to 180 degrees. We can come up with various things of the relationship between the circle and its radius. We can do all of this by abstraction, and we can find all of humanity. We can look at human beings from North America and Africa and India and Europe and Siberia, and we can abstract what is common. So there's no such thing as a completely common human being. You won't find a human who is neither white nor black nor fair-haired nor curly-haired nor straight-haired nor dark-haired. There's no such thing as this kind of human. The completely common human, or the human with no distinct sort of separate features. But we do have a notion of humanity through abstracting. We abstract what is common, and there are other. One of the things that's added in Aristotle's thinking is that you have kind of accidents that are necessary to us. So it's necessary. A necessary accident to me is that I happen to have pale skin. It doesn't. It's not essential to my human nature. It's not essential to me being human, but humans have some skin colour or other. All of them. Humans have some colour hair or other. All of them. Some colour of eyes. All humans have these kind of features. But they're not part of human nature, but they're just essential to me, so that what Aristotle called a necessary accident. So abstraction is how we get this the kind of knowledge of essences on Aristotle's view, and he had the same type of idea even in talking about mathematics. So he thought that mathematical objects are not like Plato, who plot. Now very often the word for Platonism now means not the school of the historical Plato, but believing that there's a non-physical world of numbers, mathematical objects, universals. That'll make you a Platonist. Bertrand Russell was a Platonist in this sense. He believed in universals existing outside space and time. He believed numbers were real, and it's still a view that some of us philosophers share. But if you think of what you get in Aristotle, he thought, of course, that again, no one in the ancient world and no one in the Middle Ages believed the Earth was flat. You can even see some of these Mappa Mundi in the Middle Ages, where you have God standing in the middle with what looks like a cricket ball, which even has the equator drawn on. So this was a myth invented by Washington Irving, who wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow in the 19th century, that they used to think the Earth was flat. Not true. But think about the equator. Aristotle thought that the equator was an abstraction. He thought that it was this lower part of the globe, and he didn't think that if you went down there you'd find a line or anything. He knew it was an abstraction, but it's still real enough, you know? It's still the point exactly between the poles. This is an abstract thing that somehow gets at reality. And I think that's how you end up with the essences in Aristotle as well. That we draw out what is common, and we can do science because of it, despite the fact you have all of these separate and different entities. There is a kind of a real commonality that you get that allows you to do science, because again, you can't do sciences of individual organisms any more than you can do geometry of drawings. Geometry is not about drawings, it's about, trigonometry is about triangles, these abstracted entities on Aristotle's view. So one of the things, just before I finish, George Berkeley, the Irish philosopher, said there was a problem that, he said, you're expecting us to believe that there's a triangle that is neither isosceles nor equilateral, nor right angled, nor scaling, but is also all of them. So what sense does that make? But where Berkeley made a mistake isn't that there is a triangle that is none of these things. It isn't a triangle that is all of these things. It's rather that there is a proper essence of what it is to be a triangle. And that is not a drawing of a triangle, it's not the shape of a triangle, it's the essence of a triangle. And that means simply an object with three sides. We can say true things about an object with three sides. That isn't about this triangle, that triangle, but it somehow does say true things about all of them. And this is how Aristotle's abstraction works, and it's what's sort of flimsy about Berkeley. Berkeley thought that the essence of triangularity is some kind of picture or some kind of image of a triangle, and that's a mistake. And so likewise, when I talked about matter-form composites throughout being entities, what I should have said throughout is matter, form, and lots of accidents. Lots of accidental features as well. You don't get something that's simply matter with human form. It will always have some accidents or other, and they can be studied as well, but the essence is the form itself, despite the fact essences are, or rather that accidents are necessary to individual things. Right, I think that's just about our time. I shall see you in a moment for a tutorial and to get some of your questions, and do think of anything if you want to email me as well. Okay, thanks.